Okay, so you want to own an airline. Buy some planes, sell some tickets, watch the money roll in. That's the plan in your head, and on the surface it looks like the ultimate business. Walk through any major airport on a Friday evening and every gate is packed. Every flight is boarding a full plane. People are paying hundreds of dollars for a single seat, sometimes thousands. You watch that scene and you think, this must be one of the most profitable industries on earth. Here's the problem. You are looking at the 1 hour of the day that lies to you the most. The truth is that an airline is not really a transportation business. It is a capital-intensive, wafer-thin margin business that happens to move people through the sky. And once you understand that difference, everything about how an airline makes money and how it can go bankrupt while every seat is full starts to make sense. Let's start with the number that should stop you before you spend a single dollar. In 2026, the global airline industry is on pace for a record $41 billion in combined net profit. Sounds massive, except spread across every passenger who flies, that works out to about $7.90 in profit per person. Less than the price of an airport coffee. A 3.9% net margin. Compare that to a tech company or a pharmaceutical firm, where margins routinely run above 20%, and the picture gets uncomfortable fast. Airlines move nearly 4% of the entire global economy through their cabins, and they keep less than 4 cents of every dollar that passes through. That's not a rounding error. That's the entire business model operating with almost no cushion. A modest fuel spike, a labor strike, or a soft travel quarter can wipe out the year's profit entirely, which is exactly why, as you'll see, airlines fight for every single dollar in ways that have almost nothing to do with flying planes. Forget the idea that the expensive part is buying planes and hiring pilots. That's true, but it understates the problem by an order of magnitude. A new narrow-body jet, a Boeing 737 MAX or Airbus A320neo, the kind of plane that flies most domestic routes, has a published list price north of $120 million. Nobody pays that. After the standard industry discounts, a real-world price falls between $50 and $70 million per aircraft. And a real airline doesn't need one plane. It needs a fleet, because a single grounded aircraft with no backup means canceled flights, stranded crews, and a schedule collapse elsewhere. Buying outright drains capital you'll need elsewhere, so most carriers lease instead. A new 737 MAX or A320neo runs somewhere in the range of $350,000 to $400,000 a month to lease for one plane. A typical first lease term runs around 12 years. Multiply that across even a modest fleet of 15 to 20 aircraft, and you're looking at a fixed monthly obligation in the millions before a single ticket is sold. Then there's everything the plane needs to exist inside. Pilots and flight crews, most of them unionized with contracts that lock in years of scheduled raises. Maintenance hangars, spare parts, and mechanic. Gate leases and slot rights at airports, which in constrained hubs can be bought and sold for tens of millions of dollars on their own. Insurance. Flight simulators for training, which can cost more than some small aircraft. A reservations and operations system that has to run without failure every day worldwide. Industry-wide, the cost structure breaks down roughly like this. Labor eats up somewhere between 30 and 38% of total operating costs, fuel takes another 25 to 30%, and the rest gets absorbed by maintenance, airport fees, aircraft ownership costs, and overhead. Two-line items: people and jet fuel already consume more than half of every dollar that comes in before the plane even pushes back from the gate. Here's the concept that explains almost everything else in this business. The break-even load factor. It's the percentage of seats on a plane that need to be sold, at the average fare, just to cover that flight's costs. For most major carriers, That number sits between 70% and 80%. Southwest has historically needed around 72.5%, American closer to 79%, which means a flight that looks nearly full to a passenger boarding it might still be losing the airline money. A jet that takes off with 65% of its seats sold, on a route that needed 75% to break even, loses money the moment the wheels leave the runway, even though from where you're sitting, it looked like a packed flight. This is why airlines behave the way they do. Why they overbook flights, betting that a predictable percentage of passengers won't show up. Why they'll cancel a half-full flight and rebook everyone onto a different one rather than fly it. Why dynamic pricing exists at all. An airline isn't just trying to sell every seat. It's trying to sell every seat at exactly the price where that day's load factor clears break even and then some. The empty middle seat you're relieved to have next to you is, from the airline's spreadsheet, a small loss. Now here's where the naive mental model completely breaks down, and it's the same kind of twist that makes the gym business make sense once you see it. Ask yourself, what's more valuable to a major airline, a passenger who flies 12 times a year, or a passenger who never sets foot on a plane but spends heavily on a co-branded airline credit card? Increasingly, it's the second one. And the vehicle for that is the loyalty program. Every time you swipe a Delta Amex or a Chase United card, the bank pays the airline real cash, somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 cents per mile for the miles it hands you as a reward. You never flew. The airline never burned any fuel. It just got paid for creating a number in your account. Delta alone reportedly took in around $6.8 billion in a single year from American Express for this exact arrangement. American Airlines AAdvantage brought in over $5 billion from its own card partnership. Across the top 10 programs globally, loyalty revenue topped $32 billion. It gets stranger. During the depths of the pandemic, when planes were grounded and airlines were desperate for cash, several major U.S. carriers raised billions of dollars by issuing bonds backed not by their aircraft or their routes, but by the future cash flows of their loyalty programs. The market's implied valuation, at that moment, put Delta's SkyMiles program and United's Mileage Plus worth more than the airline's actual flight operations. Today, SkyMiles alone is estimated to be worth north of $31 billion more, at various points, than Delta's entire market capitalization as a company. Sit with that for a second. The frequent flyer program, the loyalty perk, that feels like a bonus bolted onto the business, has in some cases been worth more than the airline. The planes, the pilots, the routes, the gates. All of that has, at moments, been valued at effectively zero next to the machine that sells manufactured currency to bank. This is the same underlying principle as the gym's inactive member. The core product of flying or working out isn't actually where the most reliable profit lives. The most reliable profit lives in the financial structure wrapped around the product. The recurring fee nobody cancels, the currency sold in bulk to a third party who never uses the actual service themselves. The other place this shows up is ancillary revenue. Everything an airline charges for beyond the base fare. Checked bags, seat selection, carry-ons on some budget carriers, priority boarding, onboard food and Wi-Fi. Globally, this category generated an estimated $157 billion in 2025, more than double what it was just a decade earlier. For full-service carriers, this is a growing side business. For ultra-low-cost carriers, it is the business. Frontier pulled 62% of its total revenue from ancillary fees in 2024, meaning the ticket price itself was almost a loss leader, and the money was made entirely in the add-ons. Spirit wasn't far behind at nearly 59%. United alone collected roughly $1.3 billion in a single year just from seat selection fees, more than it made from checked bags that same year. The base fare gets you in the door. Everything after that is where the margin actually lives. For a gym, location determines everything because roughly 80% of members come from a 10-minute radius. For an airline, the equivalent constraint is the route network, and it's arguably even less forgiving. An airline doesn't just pick cities it likes. It has to win landing slots and gate space at often constrained airports, some of which are effectively sold out. A single slot pair at a major hub airport can be worth tens of millions of dollars on the secondary market. It has to build a hub-and-spoke system, or commit to point-to-point flying the way budget carriers do, and that single structural choice determines its cost base for the next decade. Fly the wrong routes, with the wrong mix of business and leisure travelers, and even a full cabin won't save you, because the actual revenue per passenger won't clear the break-even load factor for that route's cost structure. Just like the gym uses lighting and mirrors and difficult cancellation policies to keep you emotionally attached whether or not you show up, the airline industry has its own quiet behavioral design. Loyalty status tiers are built to feel like a ladder you don't want to fall off of, which pushes travelers to consolidate spending onto a single airline's card even when a competitor's fare is cheaper. Basic economy fares are deliberately made slightly worse than they need to be. No seat selection, no changes, boarding last, not because it's expensive to give you a seat assignment, but because the mild discomfort nudges a meaningful share of travelers to pay up for the next fare tier. Dynamic pricing means the price you see is calculated, in real time, based on how close the flight is to its break-even load factor and how much your specific search pattern suggests you're willing to pay. None of it is random. It's all pointed at the same target as the gym's lighting and mirrors, extracting slightly more value from you than a neutral, undesigned experience would. Here's the part that should make you nervous even after everything above. Even airlines that get all of it right can still collapse because the structural math is genuinely this unforgiving. Spirit Airlines, once celebrated as one of the most efficient ancillary revenue machines in the industry, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection twice in recent years, accumulating billions in losses even while leading the industry in per-passenger ancillary income. The problem wasn't that people stopped wanting cheap flights. It was that overcapacity in the leisure travel market, larger airlines rolling out their own stripped-down basic economy fares to compete directly with budget carriers, and rising costs compressed yields to the point where even Spirit's famously efficient add-on machine couldn't cover the gap. This is the pattern across the industry's history, going back decades. Major U.S. carriers have filed for bankruptcy protection multiple times each since the early 2000s, often while flying planes that looked, from the jet bridge, full. The visible crowd boarding the aircraft tells you nothing about whether the fixed costs, the lease payments, the debt, the labor contracts are structurally larger than the revenue that same full plane can generate. A gym with a packed parking lot can still be one bad debt structure away from insolvency. An airline with a packed departure board is the same story, just with more zeros. Put it all together, and you get two very different outcomes, depending on how many of these levers you actually control. In the strong scenario, your loyalty program is generating steady, high-margin cash from a bank partner regardless of how many people fly that month. Your ancillary revenue per passenger is healthy. Your load factors are consistently clearing break-even on your core route. Your labor contracts and fuel hedges are locked in at manageable rate. Under those conditions, an airline can post a respectable single-digit to low double-digit net margin in a good year, and the loyalty and ancillary businesses alone can be worth more than the flying operation. In the realistic scenario, fuel prices tick up, a competitor undercuts your fares on your busiest routes, a new labor contract locks in a multi-year wage increase, and your load factors slip 2 or 3 points below break even on routes that used to be profitable. None of that shows up as a dramatic single event. No crash, no scandal. Just slightly lower yields, a slightly heavier fuel bill, a slightly less favorable card partnership renewal compounding quietly, quarter after quarter, until an airline with full planes and busy gates is posting a loss, or worse, filing for bankruptcy protection for the second time in a decade. So if you ever find yourself dreaming about owning an airline, remember the one thing that actually determines whether you survive. It was never really about how many seats you can fill. It's about whether the business underneath the seats, the miles sold to a bank, the bag fee, the lease payment, the labor contract was built to survive the years when the seats aren't quite full enough.